Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. You know how sometimes you watch one of those or really sharp investigative pieces, maybe on a Sunday night show?
Oh yeah, the kind that really gets under the surface of a story you thought you knew.
Exactly, and just peels back layer after layer, and you're left thinking, wow, I wish they'd spend a whole hour, maybe more, just on that.
I know that feeling well.
Well, today, that's pretty much what we're doing. We're taking that kind of deep investigative approach to a subject that's, well, monumental. It's the space shuttle.
An icon, really. Instantly recognizable.
Absolutely. For 3 decades, it was America's flagship in space. It was sold to us, as this incredible triumph of engineering, a symbol of American ingenuity.
The promise was huge.
Mhm.
Fully reusable, making space travel routine, almost like catching a plane. A highway to the stars, they called it.
But was it really, or was the reality maybe a lot more complicated? Was it tangled up in things like politics, physics, the sheer difficulty of space, things that maybe couldn't live up to those initial promises?
That's the core question, isn't it?
So today, we're doing that deep dive. We're aiming for the full story, the unvarnished version of the Space Shuttle program. Because when it was introduced, the vision was breathtaking.
Oh, completely. Routine, reliable, and unbelievably cheap space travel.
They were talking about daily flights, maybe weekly, cost way, way down.
The whole idea was this pickup truck of space,
Yeah.
right? Making orbit just familiar territory, accessible.
But as you, our listener, are about to find out in this deep dive, that vision didn't quite match the cold, hard reality. Not even close in some ways.
There's a huge gap there.
Right. So we've gathered a lot of material, investigative reports, historical analyses, looking really closely at the shuttle's whole 30-year run.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission today, it's to cut through all the noise, the glossy NASA photos and the press releases, and get to the real heart of it. Why did America's most ambitious space program become its most expensive? And what does that tell us for the future? For when we try these big things again?
And that's absolutely vital. This isn't just about listing dates and names. It's about understanding the why, the complex web of decisions, the compromises, sometimes really painful ones, and the consequences, often unforeseen, that shaped this iconic program.
Consequences, yeah.
We really need to look beyond the headlines, question the assumptions that drove it all,
Yeah.
and crucially connect the dots between, say, a policy decision made in Washington,
Uh-huh.
the engineering challenges faced in, Downey or Utah, and the human element, the people involved, the pressures they faced.
Because it wasn't just about bending metal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What happened with the shuttle has huge implications for how we approach any massive science and tech project,
Yeah.
especially when you've got national pride, politics, and just vast sums of money all mixed together. It's a cautionary tale in many ways.
Okay, let's start with that vision, the one that sold the whole country on this idea. Because on paper, it did sound amazing.
It really did. You go back to January 72, Nixon's announcement.
Right. President Nixon steps up, announces this revolutionary space transportation system. And the picture he paints, it's like something out of science fiction almost. Access to orbit becoming routine, not this rare, dangerous thing.
He literally said it would transform the space frontier into familiar territory. That phrase really captures the ambition.
It does. It promised this new era. Space for science, for commerce, for, national security benefits too, presumably. Open access.
And those promises weren't just talk, were they? They had numbers attached.
Yeah.
Very, very optimistic numbers.
Oh, yeah. The flight rate projections were astounding.
Once a week. Can you even imagine? Some people were pushing for 50 launches a year. 50.
50 times a year. It's hard to wrap your head around now, knowing what we know.
And these weren't just, aspirational figures. They were baked into the cost-benefit analyses. This is the justification.
Given the cost per flight, they were talking, what, $20 million a pop?
20 million. That was the magic number. The idea was this massive economy of scale through reusability, democratizing space, essentially.
The pickup truck of space. Load it up, go to orbit, come back, do it again tomorrow, like an airline almost.
Moving completely away from those Apollo era, use once and throw away rockets. That was the dream.
So you have this incredible picture, space basically next door, a cosmic delivery van running constantly, new frontiers opening up, but then you look at what actually happened over those 30 years.
And the difference is just stark.
Roger Pielke Jr., he's a science policy expert, really sharp guy. He put it very clearly. Vision, fly once a week. Reality, maybe 1/10 of that.
An average of 5 launches a year.
Yeah.
5, not 50.
Never operated like an airliner. Never even close.
It's this huge disconnect right from the get-go,
Yeah.
which makes you ask the fundamental question, why? Why was the vision so incredibly different from the reality?
Was it just like naive optimism,
Was it?
wishful thinking?
Or was there something else driving the design?
Yeah.
Other forces at play that maybe weren't being talked about publicly? Because this wasn't a small error in projection. It was a fundamental difference in capability and cost.
And that question, that disconnect, it leads us straight into, well, maybe the less shiny, more shadowy side of the shuttle story.
Hmm. The part that wasn't in the glossy brochures.
Exactly. Because what most people didn't realize, and NASA certainly wasn't shouting about it, was that the shuttle wasn't primarily designed for, say, putting up the Hubble telescopes or doing microgravity experiments for universities.
No, the dominant force shaping its basic design, right from the earliest stages, was the Pentagon.
The military. This wasn't just a NASA project that the military thought, hey, we could use that. It was sort of built for them in many ways, wasn't it?
That's a critical piece of the puzzle, and one that's often missed. Air Force officials, the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, America's Spy Satellite Agency, they were deeply involved in the 1970s design process,
Not just advising, but making demands.
making specific crucial demands. For example, the size of the payload bay, that huge cargo hold. It had to be big enough specifically to carry their massive surveillance satellites,
Yeah.
things like the KH-11 series.
Which were way bigger and heavier than most scientific satellites NASA might want to launch.
Much bigger. And heavier, yes. That requirement alone dictated a huge part of the orbiter's overall size and structure.
And it wasn't just the payload bay size, right? There was another big military ask.
Polar orbits. That was the other huge one.
Explain that for us. Why polar orbits?
Well, if you want to spy on the whole world, you need satellites that fly over the North and South poles. As the Earth turns underneath, the satellite's path covers pretty much the entire surface over time, essential for reconnaissance.
Got it. But for most NASA missions, science, space stations, communications satellites, you don't really need that capability, do you?
Generally, no. Most civilian missions go into orbits closer to the equator. Adding the capability for polar orbits, especially the ability to return from one and land back at the launch site, what's called cross-range capability, added enormous complexity and weight to the shuttle's design, particularly the wings.
So these military needs are fundamentally shaping the vehicle.
Fundamentally. John Lawson, the space policy historian, he put it very bluntly. He said the shuttle design was compromised from day one because it had to meet these Pentagon requirements. And those requirements just inherently made it more complex, heavier, and much, much more expensive.
It's like trying to design, I don't know, a minivan that also has to be able to land on an aircraft carrier.
That's not a bad analogy, actually. It creates this inherently compromised vehicle, over-engineered for some tasks, maybe not perfectly suited for others, and definitely more expensive and difficult to operate because of that baked-in duality.
And there's actual proof of this military lock-in, isn't there? A formal document.
Yes, a really revealing piece of paper. January 1977, just as President Ford was leaving office, his Deputy Secretary of Defense, William Clements, signed a NASA Memorandum of Understanding.
Sounds official.
It was very official and very significant. It formally pledged the Department of Defense to use the space shuttle as its primary vehicle for placing payloads in orbit.
Primary vehicle. Not a vehicle, but the primary one.
Exactly. It essentially locked the military into using the shuttle for its most important satellite launches. This wasn't just an option, it was policy.
So the shuttle wasn't just NASA's science truck anymore. It was officially, on paper, the Pentagon's delivery truck, too.
That's a perfect way to put it. It cemented that dual identity. And while it guaranteed a major customer, a paying customer, for the program.
Which NASA needed, presumably, to justify the costs.
Absolutely. But it also meant the program was tied to a system that was inherently complex, expensive, and, as it turned out, prone to delays and, tragically, risks. The needs of national security were now officially interwoven with the fate of the shuttle.
Okay, so the military's fingerprints are all over the design. Now let's talk about the money, because this is where it gets, well, really interesting in a different way.
Ah, yes, the cost.
By the time Columbia first flew in April 1981, that's 9 years after Nixon's announcement, the development costs alone had already hit $10.6 billion.
And as you hinted earlier, that was really just the down payment.
Just the beginning. And it wasn't just about the engineering, was it? The way that money was spent, it seemed almost deliberately political, about building a coalition.
You've nailed it.
Yeah.
The money wasn't just funneled to the most efficient places or the best engineering centers necessarily. It was spread out strategically
Across the country.
across the country to major aerospace contractors. Yes, Rockwell, Morton Thiokol, Lockheed, Martin Marietta back then, but specifically targeting key states and congressional districts.
Why? To spread the jobs around.
Precisely. To create jobs, economic benefits in as many influential places as possible. It's classic pork barrel politics, frankly. Ensuring that lots of senators and representatives had a direct stake in keeping the program funded.
And the source material gives concrete examples of this, right? Like the boosters.
Oh, the solid rocket boosters, the SRBs, are the prime example. Huge, powerful rockets needed for every launch. Where were they built?
Utah, wasn't it? Morton Thiokol in Utah.
Exactly. And why Utah? Well, Senator Jake Garn from Utah was a very powerful figure on the NASA Appropriations Committee. He even flew on the shuttle later.
So building them in Utah helps secure his support and Utah's jobs.
That seems to be the unavoidable conclusion. There's even a quote from an anonymous Thiokol engineer later on who said, basically, we could have built these safer as single units right there at Cape Canaveral.
Safer? How so?
Building them in segments in Utah meant they had to be shipped across the country by train. And critically, it meant they had those field joints, those segments that had to be assembled at Kennedy Space Center. That specific joint, with its O-rings, was the failure point on Challenger.
Wow. So the political decision to build them in Utah for jobs might have directly contributed to a less safe design.
That engineer certainly thought so. He said building them as single units at the Cape would have been safer, but then Utah doesn't get the jobs. It's a stark illustration of how political considerations could potentially override engineering best practices, or at least introduce risks.
And this pattern repeats with other components.
Absolutely. The orbiter itself, the spaceplane part, built mostly by Rockwell in California. Huge aerospace state, lots of political power.
That iconic orange external tank.
Martin Marietta in Louisiana, another key state.
Mission control.
Houston, Texas. Johnson Space Center. Can't forget Texas.
And then everything shipped to Florida for final assembly and launch.
Right. Kennedy Space Center. So you have major pieces being built in California, Utah, Louisiana, managed from Texas, assembled and launched from Florida. You see the pattern.
You're spreading the economic benefit, the jobs, the political investment across a huge swath of the country, making it almost impossible to cancel.
Exactly. It creates this incredibly powerful political constituency. Any threat to the shuttle program wasn't just a threat to NASA. It was a threat to jobs and money in all these different states and districts. It became politically untouchable for a very long time.
It's a fascinating, if maybe slightly cynical, look at how these mega projects get built and sustained. Politics meeting engineering.
And sometimes, as we tragically saw, politics and engineering meeting physics with devastating results.
Which brings us, inevitably, to January 28th, 1986.
Challenger.
Politics met physics, as you said. Exploded 73 seconds after liftoff. Live TV. 7 astronauts lost. Krista McAuliffe, the teacher.
A national trauma. And the cause, as we just discussed, traced back to that field joint in the solid rocket booster. Specifically, a rubber O-ring failing.
But the truly gut-wrenching part of this, the part that feels like something out of a tragedy, is that it wasn't unforeseen?
No,
Yeah.
not at all. Morton Thiokol's own engineers,
Yeah.
they knew, they warned management explicitly.
Warn them about what, specifically?
The cold weather, it was unusually cold that morning in Florida, below freezing. The engineers argued, presented data, showing that the rubber O-rings would become stiff and wouldn't seal properly at those low temperatures.
They told management not to launch.
Vehemently. Alan McDonald, one of the key Thiokol engineers there, famously refused to sign the launch recommendation. He said later, "I told them not to launch. My own company told me to shut up and approve the launch. I refused."
But management overruled them. Why? Pressure.
Immense pressure. Pressure to meet launch schedules. Pressure from NASA. Perhaps political pressure, too. They made the call to go ahead. And the O-ring failed, just as the engineers predicted.
7 lives lost. And the program grounded for, what was it?
32 months. Almost 3 years before the next shuttle flew. A devastating pause, forcing a total reevaluation of safety procedures.
A lesson learned, hopefully. But
Yeah.
then, history seemed to repeat itself.
Less than 2 decades later, February 1st, 2003, Columbia.
Breaking apart during re-entry over Texas.
Mm.
7 more astronauts lost.
Another national tragedy, and the cause this time. Not the boosters, but foam. Foam insulation falling off the big external fuel tank during launch.
And hitting the wing.
Hitting the leading edge of the left wing, yes. It created a hole, relatively small, but critical. When Columbia re-entered the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, the superheated plasma got inside the wing structure through that hole and basically melted it from the inside out, leading to the breakup.
And the shocking part here, again, is that this foam shedding It wasn't a surprise.
Not at all. The investigation afterwards revealed that pieces of foam falling off the external tank had been happening for 20 years. On numerous previous flights, it was a known problem.
Known but not fixed, or not seen as critical.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really important concept for understanding both accidents. Normalization of deviance.
Normalization of deviance, what does that mean?
It's a term coined by sociologist Diane Vaughan in her study of the Challenger disaster. It describes how organizations, especially complex, high-risk ones like NASA, can gradually come to accept deviations from safety standards or known risks as normal, as acceptable as just the way things are.
So, foam falling off the tank. It happened before. Nothing catastrophic resulted, so people started to think, okay, it's not ideal, but it's probably okay.
Essentially, yes. Instead of seeing each instance as a critical warning sign that needed immediate fixing, it became normalized, accepted risk. Vaughan argued both Challenger and Columbia were preventable, products of this insidious process where risks that should have triggered urgent action were instead accepted as routine.
It's deeply unsettling, especially in something as inherently dangerous as spaceflight.
It really is. And it applies far beyond NASA, in aviation, medicine, nuclear power, any field where mistakes have high consequences. This normalization of deviance is a constant danger.
And when you look at the actual safety numbers versus the predictions, it underlines this point, doesn't it?
Drastically. Remember those early safety analyses NASA promoted?
Yeah, predicting failure rates of maybe 1 in 100 or even 1 in 100,000, sounding incredibly safe.
Right. That was the public and congressional message. But the reality, 2 catastrophic losses of vehicle and crew in 135 missions.
Which works out too.
Roughly 1 in 67. 1 catastrophic failure for every 67 flights.
That is orders of magnitude worse than the best predictions, and significantly worse even than the 1 in 100 figure.
It's a huge, sobering gap. It shows the difference between theoretical safety calculations and the reality of operating a complex, high-pressure system where human factors, organizational culture, and, yes, normalization of deviance play such a critical role.
So the bottom line on safety: the promise of routine, airline-like safety was never, ever achieved. It remained a very high-risk endeavor throughout its entire life.
Tragically so. Far riskier than was often publicly acknowledged.
Okay, beyond the human cost and the financial cost, there's another layer to the shuttle story we need to peel back. The secret side.
Ah, classified missions, yes.
While we mostly saw astronauts fixing Hubble or doing science experiments, a whole chunk of the shuttle's job was happening completely in the shadows, right?
That's correct. Out of those 135 total missions, at least 11 were entirely classified, dedicated to payloads for the Pentagon and the National Reconnaissance Office.
And we still don't know much about them.
Very little, even decades later. Documents are still heavily redacted. These were missions conducted under intense secrecy, launching spy satellites and potentially other national security assets.
The sources mention specific payloads, like something called Damon.
Yes, Damon was reportedly a code name for a photographic reconnaissance system run by the NRO. And of course, the deployment of multiple KH-11 satellites, America's primary optical spy satellites, essentially orbiting telescopes pointed down at Earth.
So while the public saw science, a significant part of the shuttle's raison d'etre, this reason for being, was these secret military and intelligence missions.
Absolutely. It goes back to that dual nature, designed from the start with those military requirements in mind.
And this connects back to what happened after Challenger, right? With the Pentagon's use of the shuttle.
Precisely. Remember that 1977 memo locking the DoD into using the shuttle as its primary launch vehicle? Well, after Challenger exploded, that policy changed dramatically. The disaster highlighted the shuttle's vulnerability and the long delays associated with it. So the U.S. government reversed course and allowed, even encouraged, the DoD to start using expendable, uncrewed rockets again, like Titans and Deltas.
So the Pentagon suddenly had options again. They weren't stuck with the shuttle.
Exactly. And what did they do? They quickly started moving their most critical, expensive national security payloads off the shuttle and onto these expendable rockets.
They abandoned the shuttle, essentially. Their primary customer walked away.
To a large extent, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And this exposed, as one former NRO official put it quite bluntly, the shuttle's fundamental weakness. His quote is really telling. The shuttle was always about national security. The civilian missions were just cover. We needed to get our big birds into orbit, and the shuttle was the only way to do it.
Wow. So when the military, the customer it was arguably designed for, decided they didn't need it anymore,
it left NASA holding this incredibly expensive, complex vehicle without its primary justification. They needed a new big mission, fast, to keep the shuttle flying and justify its enormous ongoing operational costs.
Which leads us directly to the International Space Station.
Exactly. The ISS became the shuttle's lifeline, its new primary purpose after the military largely backed away. NASA needed a destination, a reason to keep flying the shuttle multiple times a year. Building a massive orbiting space station fit the bill perfectly.
And the public image of the ISS was, and still is, this great symbol.
A triumph of international cooperation, a laboratory in space. That's the narrative, bringing nations together, Russia, Europe, Japan, Canada, the U.S., to work peacefully in orbit for science.
A very positive, uplifting image. But even there, politics crept in, didn't it? It wasn't fully international.
No, there were definite political boundaries. The most notable example is the Wolf Amendment, passed by the U.S. Congress in 2011.
What did that do?
It explicitly prohibited NASA from engaging in significant bilateral cooperation with China's space program, citing national security concerns and human rights issues.
So the International Space Station deliberately excluded one of the world's major and rapidly advancing space powers.
Correct. It highlights the irony, doesn't it?
Yes.
Touting global cooperation while simultaneously drawing very clear political lines based on earthly rivalries, geopolitics extended even into orbit.
And the ironies just keep coming with the post-shuttle era, don't they? When the shuttles finally retired in 2011, we had this $100 billion space station up there.
And no American way to get to it.
It's almost unbelievable. We built the house but lost the car keys.
For 9 years, from 2011 until SpaceX's Crew Dragon started flying astronauts in 2020, the U.S. had to pay Russia.
Pay our former Cold War rival.
Hundreds of millions of dollars a year, buying seats on their Soyuz spacecraft just to ferry American astronauts to the American-led International Space Station.
Even while we were imposing sanctions on Russia over things like Crimea.
It was deeply awkward, to say the least. Dr. Marcia Smith called it the ultimate irony. We built the station to showcase American leadership, and then we had to rely on Russian taxis to get there.
It really underscores how short-sighted policy decisions, like retiring the shuttle without a replacement ready, can have really profound and, frankly, embarrassing practical consequences for national capability and prestige.
Absolutely. Having the hardware in orbit is useless if you can't access it reliably and affordably on your own terms.
Okay, let's dive into the final cost tally.
Yeah.
Because the numbers associated with the shuttle program are just mind-bending.
They really are. When you add it all up, over the full 30 years, through retirement in 2011, adjusted for inflation, the total price tag comes out to somewhere around $196 billion.
$196 billion, with a B.
Some analyses put it slightly lower, maybe $192 billion, but either way, it's a staggering amount of money.
And if you divide that by the number of missions, 135, what does that make the average cost per flight?
Including all the development costs spread out, it works out to about $1.5 billion per launch. Billion. With a B.
$1.5 billion every time a shuttle lifted off, averaged over its lifetime.
Even just the operational costs later in the program was around $400 million per flight in 2010 dollars. Still incredibly expensive.
Let's put that $1.5 billion figure in perspective. Compare it to other launchers.
Okay, well, the Russian Proton rocket, a contemporary heavy lifter, costs maybe $140 million per launch back then, roughly $600–700 per kilogram to orbit.
So much cheaper. And now, with companies like SpaceX,
the game has completely changed. SpaceX Falcon 9, as of a few years ago, was advertising costs as low as maybe $2,700 per kilogram to the ISS.
Okay, $200–700 per kilo for SpaceX versus the shuttle.
A study in 2017 calculated the shuttle's cost to deliver 1 kilogram of cargo to the ISS at, wait for it, $272,000.
$272,000 per kilogram, compared to under $3,000 for Falcon 9.
Exactly. It's just orders of magnitude different. The shuttle was phenomenally expensive to operate on a per kilogram basis. The dream of cheap access never happened.
I remember that quote from Joan Johnson-Fries.
Ah, yes, the 747 comparison.
Right. At $1.5 billion per launch, she said, you could have bought 3 brand new Boeing 747 jumbo jets for the cost of every single shuttle mission.
It really drives home the sheer scale of the investment. The economics, purely from a cost per flight or cost per kilo perspective, just never made sense. It had to be justified on other grounds: national prestige, technological leadership, military necessity, politics.
But the cost wasn't just the money spent, was it? It was also the opportunity cost.
That's arguably the bigger tragedy. What else could have been done with $196 billion over 30 years?
You could have built, what, dozens of Hubble telescopes? Sent fleets of robotic probes across the solar system?
Easily. Think of the science we could have done. Keith Cowing, who watches NASA closely, made the point that the shuttle delivered incremental improvements and really good photos, but not the blockbuster discoveries, cures for diseases, revolutionary materials that were sometimes hinted at in the early justifications.
It kind of sucked all the oxygen and money out of NASA's budget for other things for a generation.
It really did dominate NASA's human spaceflight budget and much of its overall budget for 3 decades, limiting what else could be pursued.
And after all that money, all that effort,
Hmm.
the most famous practical spin-off people mention is,
Better adult diapers,
yes,
the maximum absorbency garments, or MAGs.
developed so astronauts could handle long periods without a bathroom during launch or spacewalks.
And the technology genuinely did improve incontinence products here on Earth, which is a real benefit for many people.
But, as someone said, perhaps a bit wryly.
Not exactly the stuff of Kennedy's lunar vision. It highlights that gap between the grand, inspiring goals and the sometimes mundane, unexpected practical outcomes.
So, where does this leave us now? We're looking towards the moon again with the Artemis program. Are we doomed to repeat the shuttle's history?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the echoes are, well, they're hard to ignore.
Artemis is already facing delays, cost overruns.
Years behind schedule, billions over budget, and feels very familiar. The Space Launch System rocket, the core of Artemis, has faced immense criticism for its cost and development time.
And the contractors involved? Are they the same ones?
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. The same aerospace giants that built the shuttle and its components are the prime contractors for Artemis's key elements, the SLS rocket, the Orion capsule.
So if it's the same companies operating within a similar government contracting structure, driven by similar political incentives like job distribution,
Can we realistically expect a fundamentally different outcome in terms of cost and schedule efficiency? The critical question, are the problems inherent in the system itself?
meanwhile you have the private sector, particularly SpaceX, doing things differently.
Demonstrating that reusable rockets can drastically cut launch costs, that rapid iteration is possible. They seem to be achieving that original shuttle promise of routine, affordable access in a way NASA never could.
Elon Musk's quote about government programs optimizing for jobs, not results.
That's why it takes them 10 times longer and costs 10 times more. It's a provocative statement, but it reflects a real difference in philosophy and operational priorities between the traditional cost-plus government model and the commercially driven private approach.
So, reflecting on the shuttle, it was this beautiful, complex machine, an engineering marvel in many ways.
Absolutely. A work of art technologically. Seeing one up close is still awe-inspiring.
But it's also evidence. Evidence of what happens when politics, contractor interests, and geographic job distribution heavily influence technology policy. Sometimes, perhaps, at the expense of efficiency and even safety.
And the legacy of the ISS, its primary post-military mission, also teaches us something, perhaps. That long-duration human spaceflight is incredibly difficult, expensive, and risky. And maybe we need a really compelling reason beyond just because we can, or keeping a program alive to justify sending humans to live in space for extended periods.
So, we began by asking if the shuttle was the triumph we were told or something more complex. The answer seems pretty clear.
It was incredibly complex, a story of breathtaking ambition, brilliant engineering, yes, but also undeniable political maneuvering, staggering costs that never met their promise, and 2 terrible tragedies. A $196 billion monument to all of that.
So the final thought for you, the listener, the question isn't really, can America reach for the stars again? We know we can. The technology exists, the ambition is there with Artemis.
The real question is, have we learned? Have we absorbed the deep, difficult lessons from the 30-year saga of the space shuttle? As we embark on these new, incredibly expensive journeys to the moon and potentially beyond, what metrics will we truly prioritize this time? Will it be genuine efficiency, sustainable progress, and safety? Or will the old patterns of politics, cost overruns, and compromise reassert themselves once again? That's the reckoning we face.
We hope this deep dive has given you a lot to think about, a more nuanced view of this iconic program. There's always more to explore. Thanks for joining us.